Okay, so in last week or yesterday's class, we discussed about okay how to write the programs using WinForms. Okay, so WinForms is predominantly used for writing the standalone applications which requires to be installing on the client's machine. Let's say suppose your application is being used by 10 different users, so we need to install that standard application in 10 different machines. Okay, so that they can use the our Windows based application and to do their day-to-day work. So the it is in the conventional programming days, like that's how it used to work. Okay, but the biggest problem what we see in Windows programming is that, like, whenever if there is any change, okay, if there is any change in the code, right, if there is any change in the version, you need to install that version in each and every user's machine. Then only they can access the latest code base and latest application. Okay, so that's how, like, the Windows applications used to work. Okay, now coming to the another one is web based applications. When I say web based applications, okay, you need to launch the application using a browser. Could be a Chrome or Edge, right? So everything is through a browser. So with this, like, since the application is being accessed through a browser, it is called web application. Web application. So since it is web application and since it is can be accessed by using the browser, so we don't need to really install the software on individuals user machines. Everything is available over the network on a server, and once you hit the required URL using the web browser, the relevant request comes to that particular server, and it will fulfill the request. Okay, so we have standard applications which requires installing the latest version whenever there is a changes to the code base, and we have web applications which doesn't really require installing the software. As long as you have a browser available in your system, you would be able to access the application. Okay, so that is different between the Windows based applications and also the web applications. Okay, and there is, you know when it comes to the programming and applications, right, there are two types of applications. Okay, so one is interactive applications, one is batch applications. When I say interactive applications, okay, the application requires a constant interaction with the user. Okay, so normally whenever you have this Windows based applications, right, it always requires a interaction, right? Suppose, let's say, uh, google.com. Okay, so here you have to do some kind of interaction, right? You have to search, you have to type something. Okay, and you have to hit Google search, or I'm feeling lucky, or you want to move to different language. Okay, or you want to access your email, or you want to access images, right? So this is kind of like, this site requires a constant interaction, okay, in order to run this application called Google. So you are interacting with the application, so it is called interactive applications. Okay, and there are some kind of applications or process which really do not require any kind of interaction. Suppose, like, you are generating the PDF documents for your and you need to send that, it's basically it's a letters, let's say it's a letters. Okay, and you wanted to send that letters to the end users, or the person who wants to get that letter, right? Suppose credit card statement, let's say credit card statement, right? So credit card statement, what we do normally, like, let's say if there is any process, what it does is, if you want to print the credit card statement, you really do not require someone to log in and click print on each and every letter, right? What normally does is, we normally have a process which runs behind the scenes. Okay, there is nobody requires to submit, hey, say print. It's a it runs behind the process, and it looks at the each and every customer. Okay, and it see what is the outstanding amount. It calculates based on the data available in the backend tables, and it will create a PDF saying that like no, hey, like no, this is the letter for this particular customer. He is having a due of X amount, and he has to pay by this due date. So in the back end, in the background, without user interaction, it looks at the various tables, reads the data, picks up the address, looks at the outstanding amount and outstanding date, and it generates a PDF, and that PDF will be stored in a file share that will be automatically printed. Okay, so if you see entire this process, we really do not require someone to say like go and print, because it all requires is looking at the backend tables and preparing a PDF document which can be used for printing the letter. So these kind of process are called in generally batch process. Batch. When I say batch process, it doesn't require any interaction from the user. Okay, you say that like, hey, I want to generate the letters for this credit card customers every month 10th, let's say. So I am predefining that this batch process needs to run on so and so date and time. Or you can say run this process every time, every day 5 times, and say what is the time you want to run. 10 o'clock, 2 o'clock, 5 o'clock, 8 o'clock, 10 o'clock, like that. So you are giving, you're predefining the process to execute the task, okay, on a predefined date and time with a predefined tasks. That's called batch process. Okay, so interactive and batch applications. Okay, so now if you see, today I will try to cover MVC. So MVC stands for Model View Controller. Okay, it is a design pattern. Okay, I'm not sure how many of you know about design patterns. So basically, design pattern is, it is a solution. See, suppose let's say like you have a problem. Okay, you have a problem, and in order to achieve that problem, you have different solutions available. Okay, but out of this 10, one or two might be the very best one, right? Very good one to implement that solution. So that is called design patterns. Basically, to identify the best possible solution in order to achieve the problems. And the best solution, whatever I'm saying, it should be a reusable one. Okay, I prepare a best solution and make it generic so that other people can use this best practice to implement if they face similar kind of problems like I had. So this MVC, Model View Controller, is a design pattern predominantly used for interactive programs. Okay, so I said interactive programs means where it requires constant interaction with the user. Okay, so it's a predominantly used for interactive applications, and it could be a Windows programming, or it could be a web browser, or it could be a mobile application, anything. Okay, so as the name depicts, MVC stands for Model View Controller. That means there are three components available in the MVC. Okay, so I will explain like how this MVC is like what is this three different components. Okay, let's see this diagram. Okay, so here the left side is the client. Client means the person who is using the application, right? Okay, so whenever okay, let's take the similar example of this google.com right here. Okay, so here this is the one I'm seeing right now, right? Okay, here I am making a request. Okay, I'm making a request. Okay, I'm making a request. Okay, I made a request. Okay, I made a request. What happened? The controller. So MVC total, you see model view controller. Okay. So this controller component is responsible to take the requests from the client and also to provide the response to the client. So as the name depicts, it's controlling. It controls the the client interactions, whether to receive any data from client or to send back any data to client. Okay, so controller internally works with the view and model. So when I say view, right, view means, okay, it is how the data should be displayed, okay, on the user side. So this is the display, this is the now as such as the northeast trip planner. Okay, so I got some results. So now I am seeing some set of output on the screen, right? So this is called view. Okay, so view is responsible, okay, to display the data received from model. Okay, so how this model, right? So this model here, basically model contains the business logic in terms like, no, I will show you that, like, no, I mean, you must be knowing that we have the classes and we have methods where we write our business logic, right? So this everything is in model. So business logic is in model. Okay, and model interacts with the database to get the data. Suppose you have a employee model available, employee class is available. Okay, and from the client I said, hey, I'm looking for the employee information for employee ID 005, let's say. So what happens? The control goes, the control goes to controller. Okay, controller passes the information to model. Hey, I'm looking for the employee details for employee ID 5. So this model internally connects to the database and fetches the information for employee 5. Okay, and it gives back to the controller. Okay, and controller is responsible to show, how it should be displayed. That is in the view part. So it is displaying the employee ID information, then control sends back to client. So model is the actual business logic. It interacts with the database to fetch the data, and once you have the data, view is used. It is a component responsible to print or to display the data received from the model. Once you have the content available to display, okay, what happens? Then the control sends back to the client, hey, I have the data available to view and this is the view. Okay, go and display on the screen. So the client takes the response and displays the whatever the data it is rendered on the view component. So it's a more generic way. Let me tell you, like, by taking that example, like I have taken an employee, right? So let's say, like, okay, this is one more way of representing. Okay, you see here, view is the one where the end user is seeing that data. Okay, and whenever you make some kind of changes to the view, okay, I'm clicking on this some site. Okay, what happened? Now the control went to controller. Okay, so what controller does? Controller goes to model. Hey, like, looks like view is requesting some kind of information. So the controller hits model and model internally hits the database. Okay, and shows the results whatever is required on the screen by passing the control to view. So model, view, controller. Okay, so as I said, model, okay, model represents the state of the application and any business logic or operations it should perform. That means the classes and the methods. The methods, normally methods contains the business logic. Okay, and objects contains the data associated for that particular entity. So those are all are stored in the model. Okay, so that's what I put, simple. I have taken the class student class. Okay, So I have a class for student and I have the business logic. Okay, to insert or update or delete. Okay, this is a business logic. And whenever you create an instance of the student class, you have a data stored for this particular student in the memory, right? So you have the data available, okay, and also the business logic for that particular entity or the class, its model, okay. And view, okay, as I mentioned, view is responsible to render the UI data, how the data should be displayed on the screen. That is responsibility of the view. So predominantly in the web applications, okay, in the web applications, the, this whatever you see right here on the web browser, it is predominantly written using HTML or XML. Okay, so mostly if you see, if we right, you can see right here, view page source. Okay, what's happening? Okay, let's see. Right click, view page source. You see this? Okay, it's HTML page. Okay, and this is HTML code. So view is responsible for showing or for preparing the content to display on the UI side. Okay, so I said employee, right? Now here I'm requesting student details. So once you have the data from the model on the student details, okay, so view component takes care of formatting the data for the browser. Okay, so I'm having a header student details, okay, and I have a table which contains student ID, name, gender, branch, and section. And I have the values also, model dot student ID, name, gender, branch, and section. So view is responsible to render the data on the browser. So it is predominantly on the HTML code. Okay, and controller. Okay, so controller means it's basically it is the one which interacts with the client and also with a model and view. So it is kind of a mediator. It works with the browser or the client to accept the request, and works with the controller or works with the view and model to fetch the data and to display the data. Okay, so you see, so in the previous one, in the model we have the class and we have the methods. Okay, and here what I did is I have declared a object. Okay, I have declared a object. Okay, and I am returning that student details, right, to the console. I'm returning the student. Okay, so the controller here, right, because I said control is the responsible. Okay, control is responsible, like once you have the data from the model, okay, and view is the one which renders the data, and once it is available, then the controller sends it back to the client for display, right? So here, okay, so you have the data available in the HTML format. Now it is your responsibility to display or to pass the control to the client to display the value. So now the controller is taking that responsibility. Okay, so here I have declared one object. Okay, and that object is responsible to get the data and display on the UI. Okay, so here one more thing is so MVC, right? In MVC we have this MVC, it is available in the ASP.NET and ASP.NET Core also. Okay, it's available. So when I say ASP.NET, simply it means it is a Windows based, so machine dependent. It works only on the Windows. But when I say ASP.NET Core, it is machine independent. It can work on Windows or Linux or Sun Solaris, whatever the OS you have, right? And it is a very lightweight framework. Okay, remember guys, see, MVC is a design pattern. Okay, and whenever I say ASP.NET or ASP.NET Core, okay, it is a framework. Okay, so in order to implement this MVC, okay, you have a framework. Okay, and that framework is available in ASP.NET or ASP.NET Core. So it is available for Windows and also available for all other operating systems as well. So when I say framework, it already readily prepares some kind of structure or some kind of basic uh, basic stuff. It already provides for you so that you can easily start writing your programs using MVC concept. Okay, so you just need to pick up the right template for MVC so that the MVC related information preloaded with your application, so you can easily start on that application. Okay, so why nowadays ASP.NET Core is very popular because okay, it's an open source, and since it is a core, it is a cross platform, anywhere you can use it. Okay, and predominantly the client side we use HTML. Okay, so it is you have the full control on the HTML, then you can easily extend this framework. Okay, so I will wanted to show you one thing here. uh, okay, so let's say, okay, you are the client, okay, using browser, you are accessing the application, you are hitting a specific URL. Okay, what happens is, okay, this is one, let me put in a box. Okay, and here you have web server. Okay, and you have your application server. Okay, so see, whenever you hit any URL, okay, let's say some google.com. Okay, so whenever you hit any URL from your machine on the client machine, okay, so the request goes to over the internet, the request goes to web server, right? Here, see, I'm just trying to explain the difference between web server and app server. So web server, normally what it does is, okay, it accepts the request from the client. Mostly it would be HTTP kind of request, or if it is more secure, it would be HTTPS. So web server, it takes up the requests from the client side. It will be HTTP call, or it could be HTTPS call. It's been secured. Okay, and normally, once the control comes to web server, okay, uh, sometimes web server itself sends the data back to client. Sometimes, if required, web server internally invokes application server, okay, and accept the required data and sends back to the browser. Okay, so now you can ask me like, hey, why we have these two servers, web servers and application servers, right? Okay, so remember, web server is predominantly designed to accept the request. It doesn't do any kind of business logic. Okay, so any kind of business logic, right, it is normally that logic is kept in the application server. Okay, so since the business logic is available in the application server, okay, so normally when you navigate through the URL, okay, so you have different pages comes once you start exploring, right? So let's say, like, suppose take the famous Google. Okay, so you clicked on the Google right here. See, in most of the cases this is a static page. Okay, either you access or I access when with google.com. Okay, this is the common standard in response you get, right? This is called static pages. Static page means there is nothing to modify. It's mostly it's a read only data, right? You have only read only. Only thing is this search bar is the only one you can edit, but predominantly remaining all are, it's a static. You don't need to modify anything here, right? Or basically it doesn't allow you to modify. So this is kind of a static page, right? So normally, okay, I said HTTP kind of requests are fulfilled by web server and also static pages. If there is any static pages, that means for every user, the page remains same with very less changes. So normally whenever you hit this google.com here, right? So you are getting this page back, right? So predominantly this logic is stored in the web server. So that means what I'm trying to say is web browser not only accepts the HTTP request, also if there is any kind of static page, it also takes the responsibility and sends the data back to the client. Okay, but now I say, like, I said northeast plan. Okay, so what happens now? I have a different page with a lot many links, okay, and lot many information available. Okay, and I can go to particular link to explore further, right? So here, since, like, now you hit with asking for a more information, my web server is not capable to handle this kind of business logic. So what it does, it invokes the app server. Hey, buddy, there is some kind of complex request coming from this client. Why don't you fulfill? Application server accepts that, hey, I have this actual business logic available, okay, for this to show the results for this Northeast trip planner. Okay, so app server executes the business logic, okay, and it picks up the URLs associated with this Northeast trip planner and sends back to the client. Okay, so guys, this is very important because once you start working on the web applications, you normally see this web server and app server, okay, and client machine. Okay, so these are, like, a kind of a high level, you know uh, view of the web applications. Okay, and here one more thing, right? See this Google, right? Okay, fair enough, you are the one person, you hit the browser and you got the results, but Google is heavily used. Okay, there is always a million hits, right? It's always heavily used application. Okay, and if it is heavily used, okay, if you have one web server, okay, it may not be able to fulfill the request. It may be fulfilling 100 requests per second or 1,000 requests or maybe 10,000 requests, but there is a certain threshold for this web server to pick up the request. But what happens if there is a heavy load? Suppose I'm hitting almost per second, there is, like, 100K hits per second, let's say. So one web server may not be able to fulfill all these 100K requests. So in this case, what happens? Instead of one web browser, I will have more number of web servers. Okay, I will say web server 1, web server 2. Why it is not coming? Okay, so you start adding more number of servers. Okay, you're having more number of servers. Okay, now, so now if more number of clients are trying to hit the server or the URL, now the request goes to different servers. But how do we know that, like, which server is busy or which server is not having the load, right? Because suppose if I am hitting 100k hits, there should be a mechanism in place to understand which server is right now busy, which one is idle, so that I can send the request to the right server. Okay, that's where the concept of load balancing. Okay, it's a concept of load balancing. Okay, so when I say load balancing, as the name depicts, right? Okay, it tries to balance the load of these three web servers. So it knows that, like, hey, like, so far these number of x number of requests came. Okay, let's say 100 requests came so far. Okay, and web server 1 is busy fulfilling 50, web server 2 is busy fulfilling 40, web server 3 is busy fulfilling 10. Okay, and now if there is a 101 request comes, no, load balance knows that, hey, already 1 and 2 are fully overloaded. Why don't we use this web server 3 and send the request to web server 3? Okay, so predominantly, if it is a, you know, not if it is in general, no, ideally we have more than one web servers available. Okay, for your applications predominantly. Okay, you will have more than one server unless it is not a critical application, not heavily used application, but generally we have more than one web servers available to handle the load of the request coming from the clients. Okay, so this is basically, it's a how the web servers and app servers, then how do we do the load balancing? Okay, now fair enough, one more thing, right? Suppose we have a disaster event occurred. When I say disaster, right, suppose, like, we in US we always hit with the inclement weather, right? You always have, like, thunderstorms, okay, snow, okay, and fire, right? It's always there is a disaster happening on the US side. I mean, I'm just picking up US. Okay, so suppose your server is, okay, located in California. Okay, okay, suppose you have a disaster event occurred in California and your server is down. What happens then? So you will not be able to access your particular URL because it tries to hit the web server. Okay, your server is not available. It fails. So in order to handle these disaster events, we normally have a backup plan, right? So we keep a primary location, primary, and we also have a backup called secondary location. That means if there is any problem with my California servers, okay, I can route the traffic to my secondary server. Let's say it is in New York. Okay, so my primary server is down. Okay, now I'm rerouting the traffic to New York. Okay, so this is called the primary server and the secondary servers, or you can say it is a production server. Okay, it's a contingency or secondary server. That means I use my New York server as a contingency only. Whenever there is a problem or whenever there is a disaster event occurred in California where my server is not able to be available, not only disaster event, some happened, some messed up. Okay, the data center got closed due to some issues. So the server is down for some reasons. Okay, so in that case, you always have the option to reroute your traffic to the secondary server. So basically that is called rerouting the traffic whenever there is a disaster. So you switch the servers from primaries to secondary. Okay. So guys, I mean, are you able to get this right? This is very much important because once you start working the projects, you always hear this kind of words. Okay, you should not be in a dilemma like now what exactly the other folks are talking about. Okay, so coming back to where we are. Okay, so now I just explained about the theoretical part of MVC. So we have one more thing called entity framework. Okay, entity framework. Okay, let's say you have the application. Okay, so internally, if any kind of object oriented programming application, right? Okay, you have the classes, right? And it contains the methods for business logic, right? So at one point of time, see, obviously, right? So whenever you handle with any application, at the end of the day, what you do, okay, you hit the database, right? And you either insert some data, okay, or update some data, okay, or delete some data, or you read something from the database, right? Right? Insert, update, delete, and read. I can say create. Okay. So at the end of the day, these are the four things you do with the application. Okay. So now let's say like suppose you have the student information. Okay. And from the URL, okay, you displayed a HTML form where the end user is entering the student information. And when you click on save, what happens is you have the business logic in your methods. Okay. It picks up the data from the HTML page. Okay. And it it connects to database. Okay. And with the business logic you have to insert the data, right? You have the business logic to insert the data. It will insert into the database. Similarly, if HTML from the if the client is requesting to display the data, to read the data, again there is a method available in your class which has the logic to connect to the database and get the data and display it back out to the client. Okay, what I'm trying to explain is that like whenever you hit the database to do something, okay, you need to write your own logic. Okay, you hit the database, get the data or write the data and then display it back to the UI. So this business logic, you are responsible. Okay, you are responsible, okay, to write the logic to get the data from the database. Okay, so in order to simplify this process of like hitting the database and reading or writing or deleting or updating all these kind of things to make your life easy, okay, we have the concept of called entity framework. Okay, it's also called object relational mapper. I will tell you why it is called object relational mapper. Okay, so as I said, predominantly in earlier days, you used to write a big piece of code to read the data from the database, to write or to update or to delete. So you are responsible to write the business logic for all this data operations. Okay, so with the help of entity framework, okay, you don't need to write those lengthy codes or lengthy programs. Predominantly this framework has the capability and it provides various options. You can simply use and get the data required from the database or hit the database to write something. So it is basically to make the developer life easy. We have this entity framework. Okay, so you don't need to write that heavy or lengthy code to perform all these database operations. Rather, the framework takes care of for you. Okay, so why do we need? Because that's what I'm saying, right? Instead of like you writing that the lengthy code, okay, instead of spending a lot of time on writing the logic for this, it's called CRUD. You see, right? All the database operations are called as CRUD: create, read, update, delete, CRUD operations. So you have the framework providing the required classes or methods which can internally hit the database and do the action on behalf of you. Okay, so here you have the class, okay, student class and branch class, and you have address class. So there are three classes, right? So if you have these classes, right, so this entity framework core is responsible to interact with the actual database, okay, and to perform the whatever the CRUD operation you are trying to do. So you are not writing the logic. Rather, entity framework is already having that logic. You are simply utilizing this entity framework version and hitting the database and doing the required CRUD operation. Okay. And here, if you see, there are two ways, to use this entity framework. Okay. One is called code first approach. Another one is called database first approach. So when I say code first approach, right, that means first you write your classes. You write the number of classes required and the data members of that class. So you are writing the classes first. And entity framework, what it does is, okay, so using the entity framework, okay, it creates the required tables in the backend. Okay, so based on the classes available in your application, okay, so using entity framework concept, okay, we can create the databases. So you have the classes, using classes you're creating the databases. That's called code first. When is database first approach, you have the data available, you have the tables available, okay, and it is using the entity framework concept, you are going to write the classes or define the classes. So the entity framework helps here. It is acts as a mediator to create the class or to create the tables. Okay, that's why code first means always you have the class available, okay, and you have to create the databases. With the database first approach, you have the tables available and you need to write define the classes. Okay, so here I said that entity framework takes care of this creating this the required tables or classes, right? Here that is called like basically this entity framework internally uses domain classes. It's called domain classes. So entity framework, okay, entity framework in intermediate, right, it actually creates the domain classes. So these domain classes are helpful to actually create in the database tables or to create the actual classes. Okay. Okay, so this is what I explained a few minutes back about the web server and application server, right? So web server is predominantly handles HTTP requests, okay, mostly to static calls, okay, and no server side programming. Basically, I said here it comes here only. It doesn't go and hit the application server mostly. If it is web server, it's only done here. My work is done here, okay, and mostly it is to support the client side scripting, HTML or servlets or PHP, okay, and it doesn't hit the database because I said it's only predominantly for the static calls only, so it doesn't hit the database. Okay, the famous we have Apache Tomcat server and we have IIS servers from the Microsoft. This is the most frequently used servers, okay, in your day-to-day programming, IIS and Apache. And application server, I said it's a business logic. Whenever there is a business logic, okay, So the connection comes to application server. Okay, it's always dynamic in nature. Okay, and it does the actual business processing, calculations or database processing and whatever it is, right? Okay, and it is basically it does a lot many things when compared to the web server. Okay, so we have WebLogic and WebSphere. Okay, so I wanted to stop it here today. I have some personal work to go. Okay, tomorrow we'll start again, from this place. Okay, so any questions from today's class? Vamshi or Lalichand? Hello, Vamshi and Lalichand, you there? I cannot hear you. In case if you are like on mute, I'm not sure. Can you chat here? Can you hear me, Lalichand or Vamshi? Can someone respond? Okay, all right. So I will stop here and we'll meet tomorrow same time. Thank you very much.